not a paradise. Our world is full of wonderful places to relax. To get away from the hustle and bustle of daily life, each of you has taken a break. For some, a trip to a lakeside with tents and barbecues is enough, while others prefer to spend their free time in more exotic ways, traveling to distant countries. Anticipating exciting adventures and discoveries, many look forward to their journeys. However, in unfamiliar territories, the carefree tourist may encounter unexpected troubles and even dangers. For some, such leisure could end fatally. Despite its obviousness, the story we are going to discuss is shocking in its impunity and leniency. It's hard to believe, but when confronted with a crime, law enforcement did not bother to work out the theories. The investigation was effectively conducted by the victim's parents, journalists, and a private detective. Gathering information about the disappearance of 18-year-old Natalee Holloway was a painstaking process. Today, together with you, we will try to understand where the young woman disappeared to, who was suspected in her disappearance, and whether it was possible to punish the potential criminal. Aruba, an island located in the southern Caribbean Sea near the shores of Venezuela. This small, self-governing entity is part of the Netherlands and mainly thrives on tourism. The main attractions here include diving, windsurfing, and underwater tours of the coral reefs. The local recreation areas are known for their sand, which does not burn the feet even in the hottest weather. The local inhabitants, pink flamingos, enjoy wandering near the water in full view of the amazed public. It truly is a paradise. Unsurprisingly, it attracted a group of young people, graduates from Mountain Brook High School. On May 26, 2005, 124 students accompanied by 7 chaperones traveled to the island to celebrate the start of their adult lives. Since all were already 18 years old, the chaperones only nominally maintained order and discipline. It was well understood that the students had come to relax and have fun. The future college students stayed in cozy rooms at the Holiday Inn. They had access to beaches, palm trees, restaurants, and local entertainment venues. They fully enjoyed themselves, swimming in the ocean, sunbathing on the beach, dancing until dawn. Naturally, the fun was accompanied by alcoholic beverages and gambling. Thus, the youth spent 5 unforgettable days in Aruba. On May 30th, the day of their return, the only one who did not arrive at the national airport was Natalee Holloway. In the first hours, everyone searched for her. Her belongings, as well as her phone and passport, were found in the hotel. However, she was nowhere to be found. Her mother, Elizabeth Twitty, was the first to raise the alarm. She called one of the chaperones and reported that she could not get in touch with her daughter. Later, the woman recalled that at that moment, her heart sensed something was wrong. Her daughter was obedient and always stayed in touch. Moreover, she was very punctual. Therefore, her delay was a bad sign. Natalee's mother and stepfather decided to fly to Aruba immediately to search for her. Upon arriving in Aruba, Elizabeth was able to find out much more information than the police did. The police seemed in no rush to start searching and ignored the worried mother's message. After all, cases like this are not rare, and authorities took it lightly. They stated that people often miss their planes or liners. Typically, they are found in a bar drinking Caribbean rum or in bed with a new acquaintance. Mrs. Twitty last heard that Natalee was seen on May 30th around 1:30 a.m. She left the bar accompanied by van der Sloot. The pair got into a car where 2 other young men were present and drove away. After that, she was not seen again. During the vacation, her daughter's group often frequented the Carlos and Charlie's nightclub and the associated casino. Known for their bad reputation, these establishments were quite popular. It was there that Natalee met local regular, 17-year-old Joran, who offered her a drink. Afterwards, he invited her to see the lighthouse and the sharks living near it. She agreed. As they left the club, a silver Honda car with the Kalpoes brothers inside was waiting for them. 4 hours later, Elizabeth contacted the police again. This time, she had information that raised concerns. After that, the trio was detained. Initially, van der Sloot denied knowing Natalee, but later admitted he had indeed left the bar with her. According to him, they drove around for a bit, visited the beach, and later dropped her off near the hotel. The 18-year-old Deepak and 21-year-old Satish Kalpoes confirmed their friend's account. It is worth noting, the young men were interrogated together, which seemed quite unprofessional from the law enforcement side. Later, their statements were repeatedly changed. Natalee was born on October 21, 1986, in Clinton, Mississippi. She was the eldest child of Elizabeth Ann and David Edward Holloway. Her father worked as an insurance agent, while her mother was a speech therapist. The parents loved each other dearly and had been together since their youth, but domestic life eventually took its toll on their marriage, and after 13 years, the couple divorced. Following the divorce, Natalee and her brother Matthew stayed with their mother. Despite this, Mr. Holloway did not lose contact with his family, supporting them emotionally and financially. In 2000, Elizabeth remarried to a businessman from Alabama named George Twitty, which brought Natalee to Mountain Brook. The move was smooth and painless. The children still saw their father frequently, visiting him during holidays. Natalee was very sociable, which made it easy for her to make new friends. Her family was quite devout, so they spent every Sunday in church. This deeply influenced Natalee's upbringing. Relatives remembered her as very kind and modest. She didn't attend parties or go on dates, even though she was quite popular. Her beauty was striking, and her smile radiant. At the same time, the young lady was an excellent student, engaged in dance, and participated in various clubs. She dreamed of pursuing a career in medicine and had chosen a local university where she hoped to receive a substantial scholarship. As can be seen, she had promising life prospects. At the time, she was especially excited about an upcoming trip. Although her parents were reluctant to let her go, she managed to persuade them. Unfortunately, what was meant to signify a new beginning for Natalee turned out to be the end of her life. Elizabeth maintained that her daughter was unlikely to trust a stranger, much less get into a car and go somewhere with him. It appeared that something had been slipped into her cocktail, clouding her judgment. Surveillance footage from the bar confirmed the mother's suspicions. On the night of May 29th to 30th, Natalee was sober enough. She was dancing and socializing, and her behavior was neither provocative nor compromising. However, after drinking a beverage offered by Joran, her gait and facial expression changed, suggesting she was indeed under the influence of some substance. The young woman's mother also spoke with the staff of Carlos and Charlie's. Employees spoke well of the young woman, which could not be said for Sloot. He was a person of interest. During his leisure time, he often behaved poorly, indulged in gambling, and consumed forbidden substances. At one of the hotels, he and his friends rented a room where they frequently invited foreign women. Everything that happened there, Joran secretly recorded on video and uploaded to the internet. Nonetheless, he was never held accountable for this. None of the charges against him ever went to court, and here's why. It turned out that Paulus Sloot, the young man's father, was a well-known lawyer aiming for a judgeship. Apparently, not only tourism, but also corruption thrived in Aruba. The outrageous incident caught the attention of not only the local community, but also American correspondents. Many news channels reported the incident, and some continued to monitor developments. Fearing a global scandal, the island authorities began extensive searches for the missing young woman. Alongside volunteers, divers and specially trained dogs were deployed. To expand the search area, the government even declared a public holiday for civil servants. Additionally, 50 Marines thoroughly combed the coastline. An airplane equipped with a thermal imaging camera scanned over 40 kilometers of terrain. The search for the young woman continued relentlessly, but Natalee seemed to have vanished. Soon after, David Holloway arrived in Aruba. He joined the investigation led by his ex-wife and journalists. Public pressure gradually increased. Moreover, it was discovered that the hotel's surveillance cameras did not capture the suspect's car on May 30th. There was no footage of the young woman entering the building, indicating that Joran and the Kalpoes brothers' statements were false. The police called them in for questioning again. This time, the younger Sloot unexpectedly remembered that he had dropped the young woman off not near the hotel, but a bit before reaching it, at a place without surveillance. He also added that he noticed a figure in black moving toward Natalee, apparently one of the Holiday Inn's security guards. On June 5th, The hotel security staff who were on duty that unfortunate night were detained. Investigators believed they might have intercepted the young woman along her way. On June 9th, detectives finally arrested the suspicious trio. Sharing a cell with the Kalpoes brothers, one of the security guards learned a crucial detail. Satish confessed to him that he and Deepak had lied to cover for their friend. In reality, they had left Joanne alone with Natalee on the beach and had left themselves. The security guards were released home on June 13th. On June 17th, another suspect was detained, Steve Gregory Cruz, a DJ who handled music at yacht parties. Somehow, the police suspected his involvement in the young woman's disappearance. On June 22nd, Paulus van der Sloot was also brought in for questioning and was detained that same day. However, by June 26th, he was released along with Steve Cruz due to insufficient evidence. Days later, during another conversation, Joanne offered a third explanation of the events. Learning that the Kalpoes brothers had told their version, he tried to shift the blame onto them. He reported that he had parted with Natalee near his home and she had left with the brothers. However, his story was not taken seriously. In defense of Satish and Deepak, a lawyer provided a rebuttal. As a result, on July 4th, after a brief trial, the Kalpoes brothers were released. Meanwhile, the custody period for Joanne van der Sloot was extended by another 2 months. All leads pointed to him, yet the police seemed blind. Little is known about the young man. Joanne van der Sloot was born on August 6, 1987, in Arnhem, Netherlands. His father, Paulus van der Sloot, was a lawyer, and his mother, Anita van der Sloot-Hoogen, was an art teacher. Joanne was one of 3 brothers in a large family. In 1990, the family moved to the island. From childhood, the boy was a good student and even excelled at the International School of Aruba. As he grew up, he became interested in soccer and tennis, even achieving some success in sports. He planned to attend St. Leo University in Florida in the future. He was closer to his father during his childhood, while his mother considered him an incorrigible liar, which resulted in a strained relationship between them. Anita, being a creative spirit, valued true virtues in people and was very disappointed that she could not instill them in Joanne. She also remembered that he grew up rebellious and often ran away from home. Over time, he fell in with a bad crowd and developed a penchant for gambling. However, he appeared differently in front of friends. He presented himself as cool and fearless. Even one of Natalee's friends mentioned that Joanne made a good impression when they met. At first glance, he did not arouse suspicion, which is why Natalee was easily left alone with him. Locals were wary of the young man. They believed such permissiveness would not lead to anything good. Yet, he was popular with the girls, which he often took advantage of. Overall, the young man elicited mixed opinions from different people. While the investigation into the suspects was ongoing, the search for Natalee continued. U.S. authorities got involved. They couldn't directly conduct their own investigation, but closely monitored the progress and provided substantial financial support to help find the American citizen. The Aruban authorities were not fond of the scrutiny, but were willing to accept the funding. The Holloway family was desperate. In hopes of finding their daughter alive, they announced a monetary reward. Initially, the amount was $50,000. As hope dwindled, the reward increased to $1 million. Additionally, $100,000 was offered for information leading to the location of her remains, which later increased to $250,000. During this time, the investigation hit several dead ends. However, after the reward announcement, new witnesses emerged. One claimed to have seen Joanne with the Kalpoes brothers at a local night spot between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Another witness claimed to have seen several suspicious men hiding a woman's body at a dump on the afternoon of May 30th. Yet, these statements led the investigation astray. After numerous checks, their claims were not corroborated. On August 26th, the police once again detained the Kalpoes brothers and another young man. However, these actions were unrelated to the case. The arrest of these young men was more about intimidation and an attempt to get them to talk. Ultimately, on September 3, 2005, all 4 were released on bail. A week and a half later, the court removed all restrictions and prohibitions, as none provided any substantial leads to the investigation. Overall, Joanne van der Sloot spent about 3 months in custody. Once free, he reveled in the notoriety. Most would shy away from the heightened public interest, but Joran eagerly gave interviews and appeared on TV shows. According to his accounts, after meeting Natalee Holloway, she behaved flirtatiously. He claimed she offered intimacy, but he declined due to lack of contraception. On one show, the host asked, "Why should we believe you?" In response, Joran threw a glass at the interviewer, showcasing his impulsiveness and aggression to the world. It seemed very possible that Natalee could have been the victim of such an uncontrollable burst of anger. The journalist, who was the target of Joran's glass, harbored a grudge and did not forgive his rude behavior. With his help, a bug was placed in one of Joran's friend's cars. Eventually, intriguing information was obtained. The younger Sloot confessed to witnessing Natalee's death. He claimed they had indeed been intimate on the beach, but afterward, something happened to her. She started shaking and lost consciousness. He tried to revive her, even performed CPR, but sadly she passed away without regaining consciousness. Consequently, Joran and a friend took her body out to sea and disposed of it. It was a sensational confession, yet once again, he managed to evade the consequences. After the recording was played during an evening show, he quickly recalibrated. Joran contacted another show's organizers and issued a denial, explaining that he had only told his friend what he wanted to hear. In April 2007, Sloot released a book titled The Case of Natalee Holloway, My Own Account of Her Disappearance in Aruba, co-written with a Dutch journalist. In the 351-page book, he presented his perspective on the situation and apologized to the missing girl's family. In his narrative, he continued to assert his stance. By this time, the investigation and official search efforts had nearly ceased. In 2008, Aruban authorities announced 2 new witnesses in the case. The first witness reported seeing Joran and his father around 4 a.m. on May 30th, 2005, on the beach near the Holiday Inn. The younger Sloot appeared disheveled, shirtless, wearing wet pants and one shoe. According to the Observer, the young man ran toward a snack bar, but just 10 minutes later, the father and son were seen arguing in a car before driving away together. The witness's statement was checked, and Paulus Sloot had an alibi for the night of Natalee's disappearance. The second piece of information came from Joran's former girlfriend. She recalled that he once offhandedly remarked, "Who knows? Maybe you're sitting next to someone you don't really know, someone who could easily dispose of another person's body." However, this was hardly a solid lead, as the young man was known for his lies and exaggerations. Amid these developments, Joran and the Kalpoes brothers were detained a few more times, but were eventually released after each questioning. Seeing no breakthrough in the investigation, the Holloway family hired a private investigator, Tim Miller, who, along with Natalee's father, interviewed local residents and searched the entire landfill. During this time, they discovered numerous oversights by the island's police, including failure to interview Natalee's classmates or even her hotel room neighbors. It was later discovered that someone used Natalee's electronic room keys several times on the night of her disappearance. It was also unusual that she had left behind her mobile phone, a rare and expensive item back in 2005. A male DNA was found on her toothbrush after examining her personal belongings. Mr. Miller's involvement proved that the Aruban authorities had been negligent in their investigation. Paulus Sloot never achieved his ambition to become a judge. He succumbed to the immense shame and stress and died from a heart attack in February 2010. After burying his father, Joran took another appalling step. He contacted Mr. Holloway, offering to reveal the truth for a reward of $250,000. He framed his blackmail and extortion as a desire to help and ease his conscience. The family clung to this new opportunity. Subsequently, the family's lawyer, John Kelly, met with Joran in Aruba. To ensure the meeting, they paid him an advance of $25,000. When asked by the lawyer what would happen if they didn't pay, Joran responded, "You could wait another 5 years." After receiving the payment, Sloot provided a new version of events and showed the location of the remains. According to him, Natalee did not want intimacy and desperately resisted. Enraged, he pushed her hard. She lost her balance, fell, and her head struck a rock, causing her to lose consciousness. He then buried her body in a building foundation. Armed with this new information, Elizabeth Twitty contacted the police. Checking his claims was straightforward. The house Joran pointed to had long been built, and its foundation was fully set at the time of Natalie's disappearance. Consequently, the Arabin police stated that his testimony was not enough to warrant an arrest. Everyone concluded that this was just another lie from Der Sloot. After obtaining the money, the fraudster fled to Peru. However, the story does not end there. Unfortunately, the consequences did not catch up with him immediately. On June 1st, 2010, in a hotel room in Lima, Peru, the body of 21-year-old Stephanie Tatiana Flores Ramirez was discovered. She had been severely beaten, and the cause of her death was determined to be a neck fracture. The victim's father was a well-known businessman and a former Formula One racer, which led to significant media coverage of Stephanie's death. Surveillance cameras quickly helped identify the criminal. Soon after, he was arrested and taken to the police station. The perpetrator was none other than 22-year-old Joran Der Sloot. He explained that he had met the young woman at the Atlantic City Casino on May 30th. They spent some time playing poker and then decided to continue their acquaintance in his hotel room, where they played at an online casino. When Joran went to the bathroom, Stephanie accessed his laptop. There, she learned that her new acquaintance was suspected in the death of Natalee Holloway. Frightened and wanting to leave, Stephanie was stopped by Joran, who realized what had alarmed her. The event enraged him, and he struck Stephanie. He continued to attack her until he was certain she had died. Afterwards, he took a shower and left. Before departing, he asked the staff not to disturb his companion, claiming she was sleeping. Her body was discovered 3 days later. On June 3rd, Der Sloot was captured on his way to Chile. By the 4th day of his arrest, he confessed to the crime. The news shocked residents in the U.S., especially as it occurred exactly 5 years after Natalie's disappearance. Elizabeth Twitty expressed her grief, noting that justice had finally been served, albeit at the cost of another life. On January 11, 2012, Joran Der Sloot was sentenced to 28 years in prison for the premeditated crime against Stephanie Flores Ramirez. He was also ordered to pay $75,000 in compensation to the Ramirez family. Initially, he was held at Piedras Gordas prison. In 2014, he was transferred to Chalapalca prison. During this time, Joran married a Peruvian woman whom he had met in 2010 when she visited another inmate. She claimed that her husband had changed significantly during their time together, being attentive and gentle on their dates. However, it appears she was sadly mistaken. Joran was using her for his own purposes and never showed any signs of remorse or guilt for his actions while incarcerated. In June 2011, David Holloway filed a petition in an Alabama court to have Natalee declared legally deceased. Natalie's mother stated that she would oppose this, still hoping that someday Joran would confess to the crime and face trial. The hearing was held twice. Judge Alan King stated that all legal requirements for declaring Natalee's death had been met, and on January 12, 2012, he issued a ruling in favor of the declaration. On June 8, 2023, Der Sloot was extradited to the United States and placed in Hoover City Jail in Alabama. The following day, he was charged with extortion and wire fraud, but he pleaded not guilty to all charges. On October 18, 2023, he entered a plea agreement admitting to the murder of Natalee Holloway. He confessed that on the night of May 30, 2005, he fatally bludgeoned Natalee with a cinder block and then disposed of her body in the ocean to be consumed by sharks after she refused his advances. Unfortunately, the confession, made as part of the plea deal, could not be used in court. Ultimately, Der Sloot was sentenced to 20 years, which would run concurrently with his prison term in Peru. Natalee Holloway's disappearance remains one of the most notorious missing person cases in the U.S., and it is still an open case in Aruba. A series of cover-ups, corrupt deals, and bureaucratic delays effectively let the murder of an innocent young woman go unpunished, despite global attention to the investigation. Natalee Holloway became yet another victim of a sexual assault-based attack. Certainly one can debate the need for caution when meeting new people extensively, but this does not justify the criminal's actions or minimize them, nor should it allow a criminal to avoid punishment under any circumstances. Teenagers can sometimes display aggression towards their peers, behavior often dismissed as part of growing up, with hopes they'll outgrow it. Yet we sometimes overlook the severity of such actions, as a violent teenager can pose a serious threat to their surroundings. Moreover, this unstable age often coincides with first loves, and when those feelings are not reciprocated, it can lead to tragedies. Such was the case with Gabriela Alcaino, a schoolgirl whose story shocked not only Chile, where the tragedy took place, but all of Latin America, leading to the enactment of the Gabriela Law. The girl met a tragic end at the hands of her boyfriend, a fellow teenager. She had broken up with him due to his temper and controlling behavior. The boy didn't take it well, resolving the matter in the most drastic way. He assaulted and took the life of the girl to whom he had recently professed love. He also took the life of the girl's mother, who became an accidental witness. Family and friends of the victim later claimed the tragedy could have been avoided, as the suspect had been stalking and harassing his victim. He broke into her home, stalked her in various places, and threatened to take her life if she didn't return. Dozens of witnesses heard these threats, but no one imagined he would follow through. Who was Gabriela Alcaino? Gabriela Alcaino Donoso was born on May 17, 2001, in the capital of Chile, Santiago. She was the only child of Federico Alcaino and Carolina Donoso Campos, and the first grandchild in a large, loving family. Her paternal uncle Rodrigo became her godfather and doted on her, just as her grandfather Carlos saw her as the center of his universe. Gabriela grew up surrounded by love and care. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they belonged to the middle class, doing everything they could to provide Gabriela with a good life, a solid education, and a good upbringing. When she was only 5 years old, her parents decided to divorce. Gabriela lived with her mother, who didn't remarry and devoted herself to raising her only child. Her father soon remarried, and Gabriela gained 2 younger half-brothers. Despite his new family, Federico continued to support his ex-wife and daughter financially and stayed involved in Gabriela's life and upbringing. Gabriela was a kind, open, and friendly child. She was somewhat shy and modest, but this didn't prevent her from making friends and getting along with her peers. She had an angelic appearance, which elicited admiration and delight from all who knew her. Gabriela excelled at school, loved music and dancing, and was also good at drawing. Her parents did their best to nurture her talents. She adored her younger brothers, spending weekends and holidays at her father's house, which was nearby. Her childhood, overall, could be described as a happy and carefree time, surrounded by loving family members. First love. At 15 years old, Gabriela, like most of her peers, fell in love for the first time. The boy's name was Fabian Casares Aravan, a fellow student at her school who was only a year older. Their romantic relationship was initially innocent. They would walk hand in hand, eat ice cream at cafes, steal kisses, and generally appeared to be a happy couple. Fabian came from a respectable and intelligent family. His parents were well regarded and sought to provide him with a solid education and raise him to be a good person. However, Fabian himself was considered withdrawn and secretive, speaking to others reluctantly, avoiding direct eye contact, and always looking away. Given his non-confrontational nature, many assumed he was shy or had adolescent timidity, but it's more likely he suffered from social anxiety. Gabriela even introduced Fabian to her father, who approved of her choice, finding the young man calm, dependable, and rational. He had a serious conversation with the boy, asking him to take care of his daughter, and Fabian promised not to harm her or let others harm her. Initially, their relationship was harmonious, with Fabian genuinely trying to be attentive and caring. However, this harmony didn't last long. After a few months, his controlling and cruel side emerged. Cesare sought to control every aspect of Gabriela's life, exhibiting jealousy, deciding who she should and shouldn't associate with. He checked her phone, demanded immediate responses to his calls and messages at all hours, and when this didn't happen, threw tantrums. A young tyrant and tormentor. For the first 6 months of the relationship, Gabriella tried not to give too much importance to her boyfriend's outbursts of anger and jealousy. She was madly in love, tried to comply with all his demands, and naively believed that things would soon change, and her beloved would become the same sweet and caring boy who had recently won her heart. However, Fabian only grew more irritable, volatile, and aggressive. He began to wear Gabriella down emotionally, but over time, he stopped at mere verbal abuse. He might slap her, grab her hair, or her hands. In most cases, these actions didn't leave noticeable marks, but sometimes friends began to notice bruises on her wrists and shoulders, the places where Fabian had gripped her roughly and shaken her forcefully. Alcaino tried not to complain or tell anyone about what was happening, but her friends and family began noticing her depressed state and her eyes perpetually wet with tears. She was no longer the smiling, open, and sociable girl she once was, gradually distancing herself from friends, avoiding contact with those Fabian forbade her from speaking to. Repeatedly, Gabriella tried talking to her beloved, but to no avail. She also broke off the relationship several times, only to return under Fabian's pressure. This went on for over a year. Breakup, stalking, and threats. In the fall of 2017, Fabian found himself in trouble for attacking a classmate. Although the incident didn't occur at school, it wasn't clear what happened. He was accused of mistreatment and assault, facing possible jail time, but the case was settled out of court. Fabian was still expelled and had to complete his education through homeschooling. After this incident, Gabriella decided to end things with Fabian for good. However, he wasn't pleased. At first, he apologized, promised to change, and asked her to come back. But after her refusal, he began stalking, blackmailing, and threatening her if she didn't resume their relationship. Fabian lurked around Gabriella's school or home, even trying to climb into her room through the window. He called her dozens of times from different numbers, sent texts, voice messages, and social media messages, harassing Gabriella. His messages ranged from tearful apologies to threats, but Gabriella remained resolute in ending the relationship. Sometimes Fabian would disappear for a week or more, giving Gabriella hope he had moved on, but he'd reappear, terrorizing her and refusing to leave her alone. He followed her everywhere, like a shadow, and could show up at the most unexpected places, screaming and causing a scene. Gabriella grew fearful of being alone, always going places with friends or family. After school, she went to her mother's work, and they'd go home together. When she needed to travel, she asked her father or uncle to accompany her. This continued for several months, and Gabriella was exhausted, though she tried not to complain. The beginning of a series of tragic events. At the beginning of 2018, a terrible tragedy struck the Alcaino family when a burglar broke into the home of Federico's second wife and took her life. The children were at school, and Federico was at work, leaving her alone. The perpetrator, a previously convicted neighbor, was caught immediately. Gabriella and her mother did everything they could to support the grieving Federico and help him with the children. This tragedy temporarily distracted Gabriella from thoughts of Fabian, who disappeared during this period. Gabriella also focused on preparing for entrance exams, dreaming of becoming a student at one of the most prestigious universities in Santiago, with aspirations of studying journalism or advertising. However, the tragedy was just the first in a series of heartbreaking events for the Alcaino family. By May 2018, Fabian reappeared, beginning to stalk Gabriella obsessively. She felt unsafe everywhere, as her ex-boyfriend could climb over her home's fence or show up near her at the supermarket or mall. In early June, Gabriella sent her two closest friends screenshots of her messages with Fabian, along with some voice messages where he threatened her, demanding she resume their relationship. Gabriella admitted she feared for herself and her loved ones. However, she didn't tell her family about the stalking and threats to avoid worrying them. The last family celebration. On June 10, 2018, The Alcaino family gathered at grandfather Carlos's house to celebrate his 80th birthday. Sadly, this joyous family event turned out to be the last day of life for Gabriella and her mother, Carolina. The evening seemed happy and uneventful. The house was filled with laughter and music, and the large family enjoyed a big meal together, celebrating Carlos's milestone and wishing him good health and many more years. Gabriella played with her younger brothers and the children of her uncle Rodrigo, though she appeared somewhat troubled and distant. Her uncle decided to talk to her, asking if everything was all right and if anything was bothering her. Gabriella only gave a sad smile, shrugged, and said she was nervous without specifying why. The uncle chose not to press, thinking she'd share when ready, but later regretted this decision deeply. After the party, Federico drove his ex-wife and daughter home. He kissed Gabriella on the forehead, told her he loved her, and assured her she could count on his support in any situation. Then he returned home with his younger children. This was the last time he saw his eldest daughter and his first wife alive. A brutal crime. Around 4 a.m. on June 11th, Fabian, armed with a hunting knife, climbed over the fence of his ex-girlfriend's house. He intended to enter Gabriella's bedroom through the window and attack her, but suddenly the lights went on. The back door opened slightly, and Carolina appeared. She couldn't sleep and came to check on the noise. Fabian pounced on the unfortunate woman, pushed her back inside, and began stabbing her furiously. In total, he stabbed her 36 times, with most wounds landing on her chest, neck, and head, leaving her no chance of survival. Carolina managed only a couple of screams, but the noise woke Gabriella, who ran downstairs to find out what was happening. As she descended, she saw a bloodied and enraged Fabian, who caught and dragged her down. Gabriella held her phone, desperately trying to call emergency services, but couldn't. Fabian assaulted his ex-girlfriend, then stabbed her forcefully in the chest, piercing her heart. The single blow ended her life. He then moved her to the kitchen, where Carolina's lifeless body lay. He tried to erase his traces, wiping fingerprints and cleaning bloody footprints. He then washed himself and the murder weapon in the bathroom, and quietly left around 5:30 a.m., leaving the house unnoticed by neighbors. In the following days, he acted as though nothing had happened. The grim discovery and the first suspect colleagues began to worry when Carolina missed work for 2 days and didn't answer phone calls. She was responsible and wouldn't disappear without reason. Her boss contacted Federico to find out what had happened. Federico was shocked and tried calling Carolina, but her phone didn't answer, and Gabriella's was off. He called his brother Rodrigo, who hadn't seen or spoken to Gabriella or Carolina since they parted ways after Carlos's birthday. Federico then left work and headed to Carolina's house. The house seemed empty, but their car was in the garage. Federico circled the house twice, knocking on doors and peering through windows, but hesitated to go in, even though he had a spare key. He called the police, asking them to check the house. The officers, upon learning he had a key, wondered why he hadn't used it, but Federico expressed fear of what he might find inside. At 11 a.m., he opened the door and entered with the officers. They saw 2 lifeless bodies in pools of blood on the kitchen floor. Carolina and Gabriella had been dead for over a day, but Federico, overcome with grief, screamed for an ambulance, demanding someone save them. They calmed Federico, but his behavior aroused suspicion, and he was led outside to a police car for questioning. When he tried to leave the car and found the door locked, he demanded an explanation. Realizing he was now the main suspect in a double homicide, Federico was devastated. Federico couldn't understand how he could be suspected of taking his own daughter's life. Rodrigo soon arrived, and was also shocked that his brother wasn't released. He couldn't believe his niece was dead, asking why there wasn't an ambulance and why no one was trying to help. Both men were taken for questioning, and their alibis were thoroughly checked. Both were cleared, as they were with family at the time of the crime. Then, friends of the deceased were questioned, revealing that Gabriella had been stalked by her ex-boyfriend. They provided screenshots of his messages and voice recordings with threats. Easier to take her life than let her go. Federico recalled his daughter's obsessive suitor, whom she had tried unsuccessfully to break up with. He never imagined the seemingly pleasant boy Gabriella introduced to him could commit such a heinous crime. The police went to Fabian Cesaris's house to investigate. After the double homicide, the young man lived a normal life, interacting with family and friends, visiting familiar places, and even posting a photo on social media, playing guitar at a party. When arrested on suspicion of murder, Fabian feigned surprise and grief, claiming he loved Gabriella and would never harm her. Fabian had disposed of the murder weapon and discarded some blood-stained clothes, but his shoes still had small drops of blood, and prints from his soles were found at the crime scene. Moreover, 4 of Gabriella's classmates testified that they had heard Fabian threaten her, shouting that it would be easier to take her life than let her go. Under pressure from evidence and witness testimonies, Fabian confessed to the crime but tried to portray himself as a heartbroken lover. He claimed he hadn't intended to harm Gabriella, only talked to her, but things escalated, and he dealt with her mother as an unwanted witness. Yet he couldn't explain why he brought a hunting knife just to talk. Will he get the minimum sentence? After the autopsy and necessary tests, the bodies of the victims were returned to their family for burial. Hundreds gathered at the funeral to honor the deceased and offer condolences to their loved ones. Gabriella was buried in the white dress she had dreamed of wearing, but never got the chance to. Carolina was laid to rest in a closed casket, as her face had been mutilated beyond recognition. Fabian's family hired a skilled lawyer who crafted a strong defense and promised a minimal sentence for his client. During preliminary hearings, he emphasized Fabian's youth and clean record, arguing that the attack on his classmate had been settled out of court. The victim's relatives pushed for a femicide charge, but it was denied by the prosecution, as Chile's law only applied it in cases where the victim and perpetrator were married or lived together. Since the teenagers hadn't been in a close relationship at the time of the crime, the case wasn't classified as femicide during the investigation. Additionally, the lawyer argued that Fabian acted impulsively and in a state of distress. Consequently, he faced a potential 15-year sentence for double homicide and assault. The Alcaino family, understandably, demanded the harshest punishment for him. After initial hearings, the judge allowed both prosecution and defense 6 months to gather evidence. Fabian's lawyer requested his release pending trial, but the judge denied this, keeping Fabian in custody. Gabriella's law. Gabriella's father was outraged. In a short span, he had lost 3 women close to him, all to violent deaths. Now, the person responsible for the deaths of his ex-wife and daughter might get away with a minimal sentence. The lawyer tried to shift the blame onto the victims, and the authorities seemed ready to accept this. So, Gabriella's father and uncle, together with women's rights organizations, developed a proposal for Gabriella's law, which would expand the definition of femicide to include romantic relationships, even if the perpetrator and victim weren't married or living together. They were soon joined by the National Office for Women and Gender Equality, which actively advocated for the law. The bill faced opposition, as the proposed amendments would mean that perpetrators already serving time for similar offenses could face new charges and lose eligibility for early release. However, feminist organizations across the country supported the Alcaino family, staging marches and demonstrations in favor of Gabriella's law. In late August 2019, a year and 3 months after the tragic murders, amendments to the femicide law were presented at the highest legislative level. Gabriella's law included 15 amendments, eventually approved by Congress. Now, in the Republic of Chile, femicide includes any violence, injury, or murder of a woman due to gender-based hatred, regardless of the relationship between victim and perpetrator. Furthermore, if the victim is a minor or has health issues, these are considered aggravating circumstances. Trial and fair sentence. The trial of Fabian Cesares took place in April 2022. 4 years after he attacked his ex-girlfriend and her mother. Following the adoption of Gabriella's law, the defense was powerless. Fabian was charged with femicide under aggravating circumstances, due to one victim being a minor, as well as double homicide and assault. On April 20th, Fabian was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Federico and Rodrigo addressed the court, thanking the judges for their fair decision. They acknowledged that no sentence could bring back their daughter and niece, but that a life sentence for the perpetrator would protect other women from the same fate as Carolina and Gabriella. A nighttime stroll turns into a tragic crime. Going anywhere with someone you barely know is generally a bad idea that often ends poorly, especially when you're in a foreign city, and the acquaintance was made just a couple of hours ago at a local entertainment venue. It's not necessarily, though not excluded, that the casual friend will turn out to be a maniac, assailant, or robber, but they might accidentally or intentionally draw you into troubles, or even lead to a disaster. An American student named Marisela Botella Valadez planned to simply have a good time at a popular nightclub, where she unexpectedly met an aspiring rapper who showed interest in her and suggested they continue the evening in a more intimate setting. However, the new acquaintance was already in a relationship, and a complicated one at that. He was part of a rather unusual love triangle, and the other participants did not appreciate the sudden appearance of the young beauty. Her naive trust cost the young woman her life, but the case turned out to be anything but straightforward. It involved insane jealousy, the desire to cling to fading youth, occult practices, and even an international search for fugitive criminals. Nevertheless, thanks to the Herculean efforts of the investigators, it was possible to find all participants of the crime and establish the role of each. What is known about Marisela? Marisela Botella Valadez was born in 1997 in Seattle, the largest city in the state of Washington. She was the eldest of 2 children in a family of Latin American descent, raised alongside her younger brother. People described her as a sweet, sociable young woman who always had many friends, performed well in school, and after graduating, became a student at a prestigious university. Furthermore, Marisela was considered truly beautiful, petite, slim brunette with big brown eyes, luxurious hair, and a flawless figure. She always had a host of admirers, loved being the center of attention, enjoyed lively parties where she could have fun, and cherished every day. On Saturday, October 3rd, 2020, the student flew to Dallas to meet up with old friends. However, by Monday morning, she planned to return. Her brother was supposed to meet her at the airport on October 5th, after which they would head to the university together, but the plane arrived without her. The search for the missing student. When all the passengers from the flight arriving from Dallas had left the airport, her brother realized that Marisela was not among them. Concerned, the young man tried to call his sister, but her phone was turned off. He then called their parents to inform them about the situation. Since Marisela was a serious and responsible young woman, it was out of character for her to disappear without warning and not show up for university classes. The family started calling her friends in Dallas, trying to find out where she might have gone and where she was last seen. It turned out that the night before, she had been partying at one of the city's most popular clubs, where she met a black man named Chuck. The pair danced, enjoyed themselves, and had alcoholic drinks, after which they disappeared together. Marisela was not seen again, and her phone went unanswered. The information seriously alarmed and frightened her parents, so they immediately decided to report her disappearance to the police. It turned out that the young woman had indeed bought tickets for a flight to Seattle, but for some reason she had not boarded the plane. No one had seen her since that night, and no one knew where she might be. It was necessary to find out who Marisela's new acquaintance was, where they had gone, and whether she had gone with him willingly. Examining footage from external surveillance cameras located around the club, law enforcement officers saw the missing student leaving with a young man whose face could not be clearly seen on the video. According to the footage, she appeared to be walking with him voluntarily. The pair got into a black Audi car and drove off in an unknown direction. The mysterious new friend. One of her missing friends mentioned that her companion was possibly named Chuck, but that information was insufficient. Soon, thanks to the street camera footage, it was possible to determine the direction the car had traveled. Additionally, it turned out that the pair had stopped at a supermarket, where they also appeared on camera footage. Both looked happy, smiling, and showing affection for each other. The young woman picked out several drinks and candies, and the young man paid for everything at the checkout using a card in the name of Charles Beltran. Thus, it became clear who Maricela had left with. Beltran was a 31-year-old musician and even considered a rising local rap star. However, the man had a criminal past, having been incarcerated twice for robbery and armed assault. He had served less than 3 years and was released on parole. Recently, the young man's career was on the rise, and he was even preparing to release his own music album. It was soon discovered where Charles lived, and by checking the cell phone carrier's data, it was revealed that the missing student's phone had been active at that fatal night's location. However, the house was owned by a woman named Lisa Dyke, and the musician was just renting a room from her. The very strange house. When police accompanied by an FBI agent assigned to investigate the girl's disappearance visited the address, the house was empty. They were only able to contact Lisa Dyke by phone as she claimed to be out of state on business. She confirmed that Charles Beltran had been renting a room in her home, but claimed that he moved out a couple of weeks ago, and she had no knowledge of his whereabouts since. Since law enforcement was unable to locate or contact the sole suspect, they obtained a warrant to search the house where he had lived. What awaited them inside was a collection of unexpected and frightening discoveries. The house was in chaos, with disorder and unsanitary conditions prevalent. It seemed as if the occupants had left in a hurry, taking only the most necessary items and leaving everything else scattered around. The kitchen sink was piled high with dirty dishes, moldy food remnants sat on the table, and trash littered the corners. Notably, amidst all this mess, numerous empty bottles of cleaning and detergent products were found scattered around, with traces on the floors and carpets, as if something had been thoroughly scrubbed. In one of the upstairs rooms, a peculiar and even sinister black statue of Death, draped in a black cloak and holding a scythe, stood. It could have been mistaken for a quirky piece of decor, but it was set up as a sort of altar with wax candles, dried flowers, and 2 metal bowls. It resembled the Mexican religious cult of Santa Muerte, translated as Holy Death, where a female deity representing death is worshipped. The house and the atmosphere within seemed more than just strange. It felt as if something terrible had happened here, and afterward the occupants hurriedly cleaned up, packed the essentials, and simply fled. To ascertain this, a more thorough examination was conducted using special tools to detect traces of blood. This revealed numerous wiped bloodstains on the floor in one of the bedrooms, in the bathroom, and in the hallway. It was later discovered that the bedroom, where the carpet was practically soaked in blood, belonged to Charles, and it appeared that a violent crime had taken place there. But who was the victim? The missing girl, the tenant himself, or someone else? Despite all attempts to clean the traces, the blood had soaked into the covering, seeped under the baseboards, stained the wallpaper and furniture. Experts compared the found traces with Maricela's DNA, and any last doubts were dispelled. The blood belonged to the girl. The house was sealed as a crime scene, but now the task was to find the main suspect, possible accomplices, and witnesses. This task was not easy. As it turned out, Charles had fled, and the owner, even before the police visit, had hastily put the house up for sale. Therefore, the police decided to learn as much as possible about everyone who had recently lived in this house. The love triangle. Neighbors revealed that 3 people lived in the house: 57-year-old Lisa Dyke, 48-year-old Nina Morano, and 31-year-old Charles Beltran. However, the nature of their relationship and their sudden disappearance remained unclear. It was necessary to investigate each individual's background and find and interrogate them as soon as possible. The house owner, who was the only one reachable by phone, had worked many years as a lawyer, known as a commanding, ambitious, and quite contentious woman. She had been married 3 times, and after becoming a widow several years ago, received a substantial inheritance. There was no financial necessity for her to rent a room to some guy, nor was Lisa known for her charity, suggesting she had some other interest in the matter. The young black man named Charles, or simply Chuck, Beltran, dreamed of making it on the music scene to build a rap career, but he lacked both money and connections, and his criminal past hindered him. However, about a year ago, he met Dyke, who moved him into her house, helped set up a small recording studio there, and even sponsored the filming of several music videos for the aspiring rapper. Moreover, she even bought him a car, paid for his entertainment, and fashionable clothes, while insisting that their relationship was strictly business, and she saw great potential in this talented young man. The money she spent on him was an investment. The situation with Nina Morano was even more intriguing. She and Lisa had been in an intimate relationship for a long time, and after Dyke became a widow, she stopped hiding her affair with her lover. Moreover, several months ago, the women officially legalized their union by getting married. Nina moved into her spouse's house, where Charles was already living. According to a close friend of hers, Lisa had an intimate relationship with the young musician. Although she vehemently denied this, she secretly told her friend how amazing a lover he was. Apparently, she was in love with him because after their relationship began, Dyke desperately tried to look younger. She lost 55 pounds, changed her image, started wearing bright makeup, and even got several colorful tattoos. Most importantly, she evicted her own children from the home, who in her view were already grown enough and interfered with her personal life. Clearly, Chuck also had a vested interest in living with a wealthy, albeit older lover, as she solved all his financial problems and helped him build a music career. However, he was a noticeable, attractive man in good physical shape, so women did not ignore him. He often engaged in fleeting flings with young women, which drove Lisa insane with jealousy. But what role did Nina Morano play in this whole story, and specifically in the case of Maricella's disappearance? According to the same close friend, Lisa's spouse was part of this strange love triangle and was the only woman with whom Dyke not only allowed her young lover to sleep, but even insisted on it. Nina was also a successful lawyer and a very affluent woman. Thus, this trio lived in pleasure, sparing nothing. Interestingly, after their wedding, both women took the boy's last name, so the house was occupied by Charles, Lisa, and Nina Beltran. Where did the house's inhabitants vanish to? It was discovered that since the student's disappearance, no one had been seen at the house where her blood was found. Lisa was only contacted once. She answered a few questions, stated she was in another state, and thereafter her phone went unanswered. Nothing was known about the fate and whereabouts of Nina, as well as the main suspect, Charles. By tracking mobile phone signals, it was determined that on the night of October 5th, all 3 inhabitants, as well as the missing Maricela, were in the house. By early morning, their device signals had moved to a suburban area of Dallas, in a fairly deserted, wooded area. Then the signals disappeared, and a few days later, Lisa only responded from her second work phone, which later also became unreachable. The mutilated remains. Using geolocation data from the mobile devices, the route taken that night by the sought-after group was traced, and the stops they made were identified. It was presumed that somewhere in this area, they might have disposed of the missing student's body. This defined a broad search radius, but the area was vast and difficult to navigate, so progress was slow despite efforts. Closer to the new year, the search operation was halted as neither the body nor any clues were found. However, in March 2021, a local hunter wandering through the woods stumbled upon a human skull that appeared relatively fresh. He promptly reported his find to the police, and the remains were soon brought to a forensic laboratory for necessary examinations. Dental records confirmed that the body belonged to the Seattle student who had been missing for nearly half a year. However, the advanced state of decomposition and damage caused by wild animals made it impossible to establish the exact cause of death. Notably, several characteristic marks on the bones suggested knife wounds, but it was unclear whether these were the fatal injuries. The arrest of the first suspects. Soon after the grim discovery in the forest, authorities managed to track down Lisa, who had moved to Florida with Nina and rented a house in Miami by the ocean. Unfortunately, only Nina could be apprehended, while her spouse, learning about the situation, hurriedly went into hiding. There were no traces of Charles, although he periodically communicated with former girlfriends via messengers. In her last correspondence, Dyke mentioned that the young woman's body had been found and warned everyone to be extremely cautious as the police were on their trail. Nina, now incarcerated, refused to provide any information, claiming she knew nothing about Maricella's fate. Meanwhile, Lisa, using all her connections, attempted to hire a good lawyer for her spouse. It also emerged that while in Florida, Nina had put her house in South Carolina up for sale, trying to liquidate it as quickly as possible. It was likely that the women needed the money to continue hiding or to leave the country altogether. A month later, authorities successfully located and arrested Lisa, after which both women were transported back to Dallas. Initial interrogations yielded no results, and a bail of $500,000 was set for each suspect. They managed to post the significant amount and were released under house arrest. However, the women were fitted with tracking bracelets, which allowed their whereabouts to be monitored. A bold escape attempt. In August of the same year, police traced Charles to Utah, hiding at the house of one of his ex-girlfriends. The woman, who was raising a 5-year-old son fathered by Beltram, was so pleased that the child's father had returned to her that she didn't question the reasons for his unexpected decision. The arrested man initially refused to testify or cooperate with the police. He still hoped that his wealthy lover, using her money and connections, would hire a good lawyer for him and help him avoid prison, but soon the situation drastically changed. On Christmas Eve of December 2021, the tracking bracelets worn by Lisa and Nina, who had been released on bail, suddenly went offline. Due to holiday chaos and high activity, it took until the next day to send a squad to their location, but by then, the suspects were nowhere to be found. It soon turned out that they had been meticulously planning their escape for months, and by the time the police went after them, they had already illegally crossed the border into Mexico. From there, they flew to South Korea, and their trail was lost in Cambodia. The FBI was once again involved in the investigation, working with the Cambodian police and immigration services to track down the fugitive suspects. The women came under law enforcement's radar after withdrawing a large sum of money from an ATM. They tried to pay in cash everywhere to avoid revealing their whereabouts. ATM cameras helped identify the fugitives, and another camera on a neighboring building captured the license plate number of the car they arrived in. This information led to the driver, who took the police to the house rented by the extravagant foreigners. The women were rearrested and extradited to the U.S. in February 2022, where justice was to be served. This time, bail was denied, and they were sent directly to jail. Charles's candid confessions. By then, Chuck had fully realized that his lover was not going to save him from prison and was only concerned about herself, leading him to express a desire to cooperate with the investigation and start providing information. His account of the events of that dreadful night horrified many. Beltran confessed that he had been in an intimate relationship with the homeowner, Lisa, and her spouse, Nina. According to him, he engaged in these relationships for money and the opportunity to advance his music career. He harbored no warm feelings towards these women and often indulged in affairs with young and attractive women, which he never hid. While Nina was indifferent to his actions, Lisa sometimes became wildly jealous. On the fateful night of October 5th, 2020, Chuck met a young student named Maricela at a nightclub. The beautiful, slender girl immediately caught his attention, and it seemed he caught hers as well. After spending several hours drinking cocktails and dancing, he invited her over, and she agreed. When they arrived at his place late at night, Nina and Lisa were already asleep, so Charles easily took the girl to his room. There, the couple engaged in intimate activities and later fell asleep. According to the suspect, in the middle of the night, Lisa entered his room and, seeing the young beauty asleep next to him, flew into a jealous rage. She went to the kitchen to grab a large knife, then returned and leaped onto Maricela, repeatedly striking her. Charles claimed he was awakened by the noise and was disoriented at first, still somewhat intoxicated. When he finally turned on the light, he was confronted with a horrific scene. Maricela's body had slid to the floor next to the bed, where she had bled out. At that moment, Nina entered the room. They just stood there for a few minutes, and nobody attempted to help the victim. When Chuck regained his composure, he realized that the crime might be pinned on him since he had a criminal record, and his influential lovers could escape punishment. That's why, he said, he agreed to help dispose of the body and cover up the crime. Charles stayed with friends for several days, and when he returned to collect his belongings, he noticed that the blood stains on the floor and carpet had nearly disappeared. Lisa told him that she and Nina had taken care of everything and destroyed the evidence of the crime. Nevertheless, all three decided it was best to leave town for a while and watch from afar what would happen next. Lisa Dyke Beltran's version. Lisa's lawyer insisted that his client had no motive to attack the girl and take her life. She claimed that her relationship with Chuck was strictly business, and she viewed his promising music career as a good investment. Who he slept with or flirted with never concerned her. As a key argument, the defender pointed out that Dyke had recently entered into marriage and was happy with Moran. However, no one could explain why, after their wedding, the women suddenly decided to take the surname of the young lodger, who, according to them, meant nothing to them. At the trial, Lisa claimed that Charles was hot-tempered and very cruel, and when drunk, he became a beast, whom she feared. According to her, that night he brought a new girl from the club, but after they became intimate, an argument erupted, and Chuck, in a fit of rage, grabbed a knife. She and Nina ran to the noise and tried to separate the couple, but it was too late. Maricela was dead. They helped dispose of the body and clean up the scene under the threat of becoming his next victims. Witness testimonies. Lisa's friend, who testified in court, claimed that Lisa was literally obsessed with Chuck and had repeatedly confessed to her an uncontrollable desire to eliminate any girl who got close to her young lover. Clearly, she was unable to manage her emotions that night. Additionally, the witness mentioned the odd statue of Santa Muerte at her friend's house. She recalled being surprised by the improvised altar during a visit, but the homeowner jokingly claimed she was into black magic and knew how to cast a spell to ensure a man could only have eyes for her. However, it seems the ritual failed, and the woman resorted to using a knife. Another witness, a real estate agent approached by the women shortly after the incident, testified that they were eager to sell several properties they owned as quickly as possible. They also wanted to put their Dallas home on the market, but since it was the site of the alleged crime, they couldn't while the investigation was ongoing. The situation escalated when the remains of the missing girl were discovered, after which Lisa and Nina were ready to sell the property at half price just to get the money quickly. Trial and sentences. The court took into account Charles's full confession and his cooperation with the investigation. However, the situation for the fugitives worsened after their attempt to flee to another continent. In March 2023, Lisa Dyke Beltran was found guilty of the brutal crime against 23-year-old Maricela, concealing evidence and attempting to flee. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As for Charles Beltran and Nina Moran, they fully admitted their guilt and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. They were only found guilty of concealing evidence. Nina was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but could be released in 3 years due to good behavior. Charles, previously convicted on multiple occasions, was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 8 years.